Hi, everyone. This is Ananda from Boston Doula Circle, and we're here tonight to talk about the topic of facing pain in labor with drugs or without. And we're so glad to have you with us. I am the director of Boston Doula Circle, and we provide birth doula services, postpartum doula services, lactation counseling, and a variety of other offerings in the greater Boston area, in addition to offering our Zoom workshop series, which can be attended by people in any location. And again, we're so glad to have you with us. I am also the co-author of The Doula Guide to Birth, which is a book published by Penguin Random House. And I've been working with new families for a little over 27 years, if I'm doing the math correctly. So I love talking about the topics that we have on the agenda tonight. I'm joined by my co-teacher, Carrie, and I'm going to ask Carrie to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Babish, and I am a member of Boston Doula Circle. I'm a full spectrum doula, and I work as a postpartum doula, a birth doula, and a lactation specialist on the team. I'm also a mom of three and a former middle school teacher. So I really enjoy being a part of these workshops that we offer because it lets me come back to my teaching roots a bit. And I'm very happy to have you all joining us this evening.
Thank you, Carrie. I'll just quickly describe how we're going to conduct the workshop tonight, which is that everyone who is watching live will be muted except for myself and Carrie. But we do want to hear from you. So if you have comments or questions as we go along, please continue to put those into our chat box here on Zoom, and we will do our best to answer your questions and get to those as we're able to. And if we have any major technical difficulties where, for example, if Zoom were to completely crash, we just ask you to have patience and come back to join us 5 minutes later, and hopefully we'll all be together again. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to share our agenda for today. These are the topics that we're planning to talk about. Number one, we'd like to consider the question, what does labor feel like, for those who might not have had that experience yet. And then we're going to be talking about ways to respond to the sensation of labor. So we'll be discussing 7 types of natural or non-medical forms of pain relief. We'll be discussing 6 types of medical pain relief. We're going to go beyond just the epidural. And lastly, we're going to discuss the question of how will you know what your limits are in labor? How will you know what's manageable for you, and in order to make the right decisions as you're in the middle of this experience yourself? So I'm happy to start us off with the topic of what labor feels like. And we find it helpful to take a realistic perspective when we're talking about this topic. And what I can say is that childbirth is usually the most physically and emotionally challenging event that a person will ever voluntarily go through in their lifetime. That's true for most people. And that applies to the person who's actually in labor. And it's also true for their partner or support person, because helping someone go through labor is an intense experience in itself, both mentally and physically. And when we think about this intensity, at the same time, it's important to remember that you can do it. And both of these things are true at the same time. Labor is a very intense experience, and you can do it like everyone who came before you and all of the people giving birth that got us to where we are today. So I like to face the reality of this and to embrace the reality of this, that you're very capable and strong. So there are a few experiences that people may have had, that you might have had, which might give you a preview of what the sensations of labor can feel like. So I'll mention a few of those. One would be Braxton Hicks contractions. Those are the practice contractions that are that the uterus takes on or acts out during pregnancy. And these practice contractions start in the first trimester of pregnancy, but we don't ever really hear anyone describing them that early in pregnancy. Occasionally, we'll hear people say that they can detect their practice contractions about midway through pregnancy. That was my experience. But it's probably most common that people are aware of them in the last few weeks of pregnancy. But they happen for all of us, and they feel like a tightness in the abdomen. It can feel like all of a sudden your belly feels like a basketball or a watermelon. It's that firm when you touch it. And if you're not sure if you're experiencing that or able to detect that yet, just give yourself some moments each day to kind of quietly tune in and notice whether there might be something going on in your abdomen with that very tight sensation. You can press on it from the outside. It's safe to do so. It's safe to press on it and see if you can become more aware of that. So that's a preview. The way that these practice contractions work is the same biological design as real labor contractions. They just happen in a more coordinated and regular fashion during real labor, and they don't go away. The practice contractions tend to come on here and there for short periods from day to day, but real labor comes on and does not. It forms a pattern, so they will come and go every several minutes, but as that pattern continues, the pattern itself is not going to go away. Some other previews of what labor might feel like is that some people say that the sensation of menstrual cramps has something in common with labor cramps or contractions. Everyone's menstrual period feels different. So when I hear someone say that they think they're in labor and it feels like menstrual cramps, I'll ask them, what do your menstrual cramps feel like? It might be a kind of a dull and achy sensation, or it could be a much stronger cramping sensation. And so that can vary from person to person. If someone has experience with endometriosis or a pelvic pain condition, they may have experienced the type of cramping that can resemble labor. And for anyone who's ever had the experience of having an IUD inserted as a method of contraception, occasionally IUD is used for other reasons besides contraception, but if you've ever had the experience of that device being inserted into the uterus usually responds with a cramping sensation. So that would give you a preview as well. And one time I was teaching a childbirth class, and a father-to-be asked the question, he asked whether a menstrual cramp could be compared to a Charlie horse. And I loved that description. And I said, that's great. You know, he was somebody who did not have a uterus and couldn't you know, didn't have a direct experience of that, but he knew what a Charlie horse was, and that's a cramp in the calf, the lower leg. Those are more common during pregnancy. So if you're pregnant, you might also be experiencing that. It's a sudden involuntary contraction of a muscle. That's what a Charlie horse is. I'd say the difference is, or from my personal experience, when I've had a Charlie horse, it's come on very suddenly and it's kind of taken my breath away. The contractions of labor actually come on in such a way that they form a wave. So they start out with a mild sensation, that sensation increases, it reaches a peak, and then the sensation of the contraction starts to subside and go away. And it's actually, I would actually call it slightly gentler than a Charlie horse in terms of not coming on so suddenly. I'll also mention that some people have described having a sexual response in labor. We don't hear about that very often. But all of the same organs are involved. The organs that are involved with lovemaking and sexuality are the same organs that are involved with childbirth. And some people have actually reported spontaneously having an orgasm, and again, we don't hear that very often. It's of course, it's probably a small number, but other people have used intimacy or sexual activity in labor in the privacy of their home as a form of comfort and pain relief for childbirth. And it's a very effective form of pain relief. It might be one of the most effective forms of pain relief. Orgasm has been found to be 100% pain relieving, at least temporarily, and we just don't hear that very much. So I'm going to ask Carrie, my co-teacher, to drop a link into our chat box, which she's already done, on an article that was reporting on a study that was done on this topic. It's called "Can Women Orgasm in Childbirth?" And it's just a totally fascinating subject to consider. So feel free to look further into that. I'll also say that most people describe the beginning of labor as not being painful. So we don't have to kind of worry or anticipate that we're going to suddenly be in pain. There's a phrase that childbirth instructors like ourselves use to describe how labor unfolds. And the phrase is to say that contractions become longer, stronger, and closer together as the process of labor unfolds. And that's a great description. That is exactly what happens. So someone might start out feeling these tightening sensations in the belly coming every 10 to 15 minutes. And then a couple of hours pass and they notice that becomes stronger, and the contractions become longer and they become closer together. And that'll last for a few more hours. And then we'll ramp up to the next level. And that is how the process works for the entire experience of childbirth. One thing I'd like to mention is that as our body is creating these contractions, your body is also releasing endorphins, which are the hormones that are our natural painkillers. And those endorphins increase throughout labor, just like the intensity of labor itself increases. What we sometimes hear people say when they get to a later point in their labor, they might make a comment saying, the last contraction that I had wasn't that bad. And that's because every contraction is different. They don't all happen at the maximum intensity. And when we hear someone make that comment, that last one wasn't that bad, they might not have said that earlier in labor. But what's happened now that they're getting closer to the end of labor, their endorphin levels are so high that they can really handle more intensity. And after someone is given birth, their endorphin levels are the highest that they'll ever be in someone's lifetime. They're 30 times higher after giving birth than they would be for someone who's not pregnant. And that applies to births where medication is not used. You're left with the endorphins after the birth. If medication is used, the medication counteracts the endorphins. So we wouldn't get that bonus, the flood of endorphins after the birth, but that is what happens when medication is not used. So we've gone through most of the stages of labor. When we get to the point where contractions they're at their strongest intensity and they're at the closest frequency, so they are probably in the range of about 2 to 3 minutes apart, we're nearing the end of labor, and that phase is called transition. And it's the most intense stage of labor, but it's also the shortest phase of labor. So transition typically lasts about an hour. And what's happening during all of these phases is that the opening of the uterus, which is called the cervix, it's dilating to allow the baby to exit. And after transition, that intense phase, there's often a resting phase. So people sometimes call it the rest and be thankful phase. And that can last a few minutes. It can last a few hours as well, that resting phase. And after that resting phase is when the birthing person will actually push their baby out of their body. So I hope that was a helpful description of some of the sensations and the process of labor. And I'm going to now turn things over to Carrie. Let's see, we might have another situation where Carrie has frozen. So I'm going to take a micro break here for about 1 to 2 minutes, and let's see if Carrie's able to tune back in, and if not, I'll start us up again. So let's take a micro break. Okay, so I'd like to ask Carrie to
Yeah, I'm here, Ananda.
start up. Okay, go ahead.
Apologies, everyone. My computer has decided that it really does not want to cooperate with us right now. So I'm on my phone. Hopefully it will behave itself a little bit better. We're going to begin by talking about some methods of dealing with the sensations of labor that are non-medical or natural forms of pain relief. And these are all hands-on human support that we like to refer to as techniques anyone can use, because most of them don't require a lot of special training. However, many people have reported that when labor began, they forgot to make use of the techniques they were hoping to try. if we don't use them, they can't be effective. So this is where a doula can be helpful, because a doula's job is to remind you throughout labor about what techniques can be useful and when to use them. Ananda, are you having any trouble hearing me?
The volume feels a little low, but it might be because I have a big fan on.
Oh, okay.
Just wondering if anybody else was needed a little help hearing you.
All right. I can always put my
Okay,
voice on.
we're hearing folks are saying it's good.
Great. So I think we've got a slide coming up that's gonna offer us a few suggestions that I can talk about in a little more detail. So here we have our 7 natural or non-medical pain relief methods. The first one you'll see is to get out of bed, and anyone can use this technique, yet 75% of people report going to the hospital, getting into bed, and never once getting out of bed during labor. Those who do get out of bed report less pain, because freedom of movement gives us a simple way to respond to the sensations of labor. Very naturally, oftentimes, we move in ways that create space and relieve pressure in our bodies during labor. The second item on the list is one of my personal favorites. That's immersion in warm water, or the use of a warm shower. And this is not used for the same purpose that we use bathing in everyday life. We're not just getting in to quickly wash up and get out. We're staying in the warm water for up to 90 minutes at a time to achieve relaxation and pain relief. In active labor, this can help to speed labor up. In early labor, it can help to slow labor down so you can sleep, which is a good thing. Some people get worried about slowing down their labor, but if you can slow down in early labor to allow yourself time to rest, that's not a bad thing. You want all the sleep you can get. The third item on our list here is touch and massage. Studies show that the fewest number of people report using touch and massage in labor as a form of pain relief, but those who do rate it as one of the most effective forms of natural pain relief. This can include simply being held by a support person, having a back rub, or trying other techniques. Doulas have been known to tell our clients to practice cuddling during pregnancy if you're partnered. That type of gentle caressing is perfect for labor. If you spend time cuddling on a regular basis during pregnancy, it may come more naturally to you during birth itself. Ananda, if you're able, it's a little trickier for me on my phone. If you're able to drop the link in the chat, we have a massage class, partner massage class for pregnancy and labor that we really love offering, and it's available on our YouTube channel. Hopefully Ananda can drop that in there for you. Otherwise, I'll get it in there. Not talking.
I think what we'll do, we're gonna have a few links to post. However, on my device, I'm not able to do that right now while I'm screen sharing. So at a later point, we do have some resources for you, and we'd love to share a free recording of a partner massage class with you.
So I'll get those all into the chat for you when Ananda is doing her part of the facilitating. So the next item on our list that you can see here is dancing. It's joyful, it raises endorphins, it moves our hips, which helps babies to rotate into position. And any kind of dance is beneficial. And it's been used in many cultures throughout history during pregnancy and labor. You can just put on your favorite music and start moving in a way that's comfortable for you. As we mentioned, movement of the hips is especially beneficial. If you'd like to find a class specifically for pregnant people, you can visit the website of an organization called Dancing for Birth, which again we'll put into the chat if you're interested in checking that out. Forward-leaning positions are the next item on the list, and contractions pull the uterus forward. So positions in which you're leaning forward allow the uterus to do what it already wants to do. We're leaning into the action of our uterus. Lying back tends to make it so that the uterus has to work harder to tilt forward and therefore causes more pain. And then the use of mental strategies. Labor is largely a mental game, and our mental state really does affect our physical state during labor. So things such as hypnobirthing and other hypnosis-based programs, childbirth education programs, mindfulness techniques such as noticing how a contraction changes from moment to moment and how each contraction is different. They don't all occur at maximum intensity. Sometimes we will encourage our clients to visualize the wave, the rise and fall of a contraction, because generally, if a contraction lasts a minute, the hard work of the uterus tightening lasts for about 30 seconds. And then we reach the peak and we have 30 seconds where we can just let go and let our bodies release that contraction. So just these mindfulness techniques can really help us to manage the sensations of labor with our minds. And then number 7, we like to say that using a doula is a form of pain relief. There are now many studies going back over 40 years which show that when a doula is used, the need for pain medication is reduced by anywhere from 25 to 60%. This is not because doulas are withholding drugs. These positive statistics are simply a side effect of having a trained support person with you. There is a doula for every budget, including pro bono doulas for families experiencing financial difficulties. We'll put a link into the chat shortly for a website called Doula Match, which is a great resource to find doulas at every budget in your area. And now I'm going to hand things back over to Ananda.
Hey, I wanted to share this quotation with you from a website and an organization called mamanatural.com, and I liked this quote myself quite a bit. And it says that if you can remember that the pain is useful and allow it to wash over you instead of fighting it, the pain is not nearly as bad. Ask anyone who planned and achieved a drug-free birth, and they will agree that fighting the pain just makes it worse. And I think that if it's possible to remember this point, it can be quite helpful. And this is true in many areas of life, whether we are facing a physical challenge or a mental or emotional challenge. And I'll say even this evening, before we started tonight's workshop, I had a little bit of stage fright. And as I found myself fighting the stage fright, it's getting worse. But when I realized that I could instead kind of pause and mentally shift my attention so that I was embracing what was happening. I was just having some normal butterflies. It felt much better, and this applies to labor and birth. It applies to many other sensations in our life. And someone had asked earlier in the chat, for a little more description of the sensations of labor. So I'd like to share a couple of other thoughts and points about kind of anticipating what what things might feel like. One thing that I hope is helpful for people is that, again, labor starts out in such a way that we don't really ever hear anyone say that there's pain with those initial sensations. The body is, it's starting a journey. Some people have compared it to, climbing a really tall mountain or to running a marathon. And there is a comparison to be made there, in that our bodies are working hard, and they're working hard over time. And they are working a bit harder as time goes on, in order to finish the process, to get to the end of the process. And when we think about the ways that we prepare people for an athletic event, we really think about ways to help people tap into their own endurance capacities. So if you've ever participated in any type of endurance event, I would invite everybody to reflect on that. And in fact, I'd love to ask you right now, um, to drop something into the chat box. What are the endurance events that you can think of that you've experienced in your lifetime? And almost everybody I met has had one. So it could be an obvious one, like running a marathon, or some other kind of athletic event, but there's lots of them. So if you've ever worked a double shift at work, and or an overnight shift, or you've stayed up all night studying, or you've done some other kind of physical or mental endurance event, let's I'd love to hear from you, because like I said, I think everybody has one. So somebody says military training. That's fantastic. Someone else says playing a soccer tournament with back-to-back games. So give us your answers here, and let's inspire each other with our endurance events. I'll name another one that comes to mind. Someone once told me that they went on a meditation retreat for 10 days, where they had to sit quietly and silently for 10 days. And we don't necessarily think of that as being meditation, as being painful, but physically and mentally, that was really challenging. So someone else says a durational dance performance. So it was a dance that lasted for 6 to 12 hours. And then someone, I'm not sure if I'm reading that one properly, I apologize, but a trip that involved a lot of walking. Someone else says a multi-day backpacking trip. And so let's see, 7 of 10 miles of hiking at an ashram retreat. And so keep going. Send us some more. And what I ask people to do is to think about whatever your endurance event has been in the past. What were the things that helped you to make it through, and to find your stamina? And the types of things that people have shared with me is that support was very important to them. Having people cheer them on, staying fed, taking a break if possible. And if you can reflect back on these experiences, you can draw upon that in labor, whether you go through your entire labor drug free, or you use medication at some point. Those previous experiences can help you. And so people are sharing things that have been helpful to them. Lots of water and little naps. Absolutely. Hydration, keeping our organ systems fueled and watered is going to be helpful. Motivational music, knowing that there's an end. Absolutely. This time tomorrow, you're going to have a baby in your arms if you're in labor right now. So those are we can use similar strategies to other endurance events that you may have experienced. And again, the sensations of labor are going to intensify. So just like if you're running a race, you're gonna feel things more intensely as you go on. And I just like to remind folks that when someone's preparing for a marathon, we tell them how much we admire them for taking that on. And it's the same thing with childbirth. We don't say to somebody who's going to be running a marathon, like, oh, that's going to be so hard. Why are you doing that? Be sure to look for an escape route as soon as you can. Um, and you're doing something, healthy and powerful. And the same is true with childbirth. It's a normal, healthy bodily function. So, um, and Carrie is back with us, and I just need to find her. And someone else mentions really knowing that there's no way out but through helps me cope. So again, I love that, embracing um, the fact that you can uh, work with this process rather than um, fighting it. So I would like to unmute Carrie, but I don't see her yet. So hang on a second. When we have, so right now we're just having a little bit of a technical snafu, and actually, I love it when there's a technical snafu. And I've always felt that way in all the years that I taught childbirth classes. Sometimes I had to teach a class that should have had an entire slideshow PowerPoint presentation, and it didn't work at all. And this is it gives us a little preview of what parenting is like, and childbirth. They're not predictable, and we do the best, and we find the resources within ourselves, even if there's a snafu. So Carrie's back with us. I'm going to talk a bit now about. I'd like to start talking about medical forms of pain relief. Carrie went over the natural or non-medical forms of pain relief for us. And we're also going to talk, we're going to keep incorporating the topic of how to know what your limits are in labor, how much you can handle, and what feels healthy, and what feels like the right approach for you during your unique labor. What I'd like to do is actually pose another question to our live audience, and we're gonna think about things from this perspective, which is, how will you know whether to request pain medication in labor, and when would you know that it's time to do so? So if you have any ideas of how you might answer this question, I'm going to ask you to reflect on this a bit. You might not know exactly how to answer this, but I don't want you to worry about getting the answer right. There is no right answer. I just would like to ask folks to share any thoughts that you have in response to this question. So go ahead and do that. Once again, you can share some answers in our chat box on this. And I'm going to give folks a couple of minutes to do that. So if you'd like to also take a stretch break, um, or use the bathroom or anything that you need to do at this point, we'll take a break for about 2 or 3 minutes. But what do you think the answer to this question might be for you, as best as you can answer it? And we'll come back shortly. Okay, so please continue to share answers if you'd like to. And I'm going to read a few things that folks have written and some of the messages that are here in our chat box. So one person says a previous birth is the only thing I can compare it to, but I'm anticipating different challenges with this one, with the new birth. And the same person says the answer is maybe if I'm about to pass out, but I'd like not to medicate. So you're going to see everyone's going to have a different answer to that question. And the person who said that said they're anticipating different challenges with their second birth. If you'd like to also share, if you feel comfortable, feel free to also share in our chat box what are some of those different challenges. Another person says, when your doula gives you the green light after all natural means have been exhausted, and that is a really helpful comment. And I'm going to elaborate on that in just a moment. Someone says they're not sure. Thinking about that is one of the reasons I'm here. I didn't know what to expect with my first labor and didn't feel like I prepared for the pain. Someone else said, I've had 2 unmedicated births. The second was harder than the first. I'm worried about my upcoming third. And I'd like to address that. That was not officially on the agenda, but the difference between first, second, and third labors. I'd like to address that. So I'll make a note to myself about that. And then someone else says they've never given birth before, but perhaps a little bit before you're at your limit. Great. Someone else says, I don't know when to request it, but I do have some anxiety around being told this is your last chance to get an epidural. And I'll comment on that one right now while I'm thinking of it. There was a time, I've been a doula for 27 years, and in the beginning of my career, the medical guidelines were to let a person in labor know that medication could only be requested up until a certain point in labor. That was changed. Those guidelines were changed. I feel like it may have been about 10 years ago, the American College of OBGYNs and I forget the name, but the National Society of Obstetric Anesthesiologists agreed and issued guidelines together stating that a person can request medication at any time. There's no limit for it to be too early or too late in labor. So I wouldn't want anyone to have anxiety about that. And we could say more about it. There's a little bit more to that question, but that's the basic story. Someone says, I thought it was useful to have signed the paperwork for an epidural, even though I didn't plan to use it. It took some anxiety away. So it sounds like that was something that the person did maybe earlier in labor or before labor so that they didn't have to deal with paperwork during childbirth. So there are a few more comments here, which I'm gonna try to get to those as well. Or maybe Carrie can do that. If you'd like to do any Carrie, if you'd like to write anything into the chat, I think the last 3 are the ones I didn't get to. 4, the last 4. So what I wanted to say, somebody's comment earlier said that they might look to their doula to give them the green light. And I said that would be helpful in the sense that everyone is capable of going through a normal labor without drugs. And what's important is to have someone who can give you feedback about what is normal. What are the normal sensations and what is normal behavior in labor? Because what we've seen is that when a labor is going normally, if it's the person's choice, if it's their plan and their goal to complete the process without medication, everyone is capable of doing that. And it's not it will be, you know, there will be an intensity to it, but again, the challenging part will come at the end. For most people, it lasts about 1 hour, and that's the transition period where someone might really feel like they are being pushed to, you know, really being pushed to their limits, but it's the shortest part of labor. And someone who's familiar with normal labor can give you the feedback. So doulas are going to say that throughout labor, this is a good normal labor. And in order, you know, they want to help, we want to help relieve any anxiety about that. Later on, we'll say it again. This is still a normal labor and you're doing great and you're doing the right things. So we're going to give you that feedback. If something abnormal were happening, we would be honest and we would say that as well. But one of our roles is to normalize and to help you with that. And if a doula is not present, you can certainly ask any of your caregivers, your nurse, doctor, or midwife, if what is happening is normal, if they have not already mentioned that to you. And oftentimes that reassurance does help relieve someone's anxiety in labor so that they can find that stamina to continue. So knowing what's normal is really helpful. And if the sensations or the potential pain of labor is normal, then it's simply the personal choice of the pregnant person whether to use pain medication. It's a personal choice. And then I'd like to go back to the question from that I had for you a few minutes ago was, you know, when you're right in the midst of labor, how will you know whether to use medication and when to use it? And the answer that I'd like to share is that a person in labor is capable of deciding for themselves whether or not they want to request drugs. So on some level, you know, we enter an altered reality when we're in labor. It's not like everyday time and space, but you absolutely will retain your ability to make that decision. And the job of your support people is to use their best listening skills to help you answer that question for themselves. So as labor becomes more intense, let's say we're getting into, you know, middle labor or we're getting closer to the later later part of labor, we will sometimes hear the pregnant person ask, certainly as doulas we get asked this, but they might ask their family members, you know, should I ask for drugs now? And what the support people can do is respond by saying, what do you think? And that's what I would do as a doula. If someone says to me, Ananda, should I request drugs? I would say, what do you think? The pregnant person might respond by saying, I don't know. I'm not sure if I can do this for 10 more hours. And if that's the case, if that's what somebody's saying, I suggest that we remember that is a normal expression of perhaps some self-doubt in response to hard work. But at the same time, that is not actually a request for drugs. The person is simply saying they don't know. You know, so they've asked me, you know, should I request drugs? I say, what do you tell us what you think? And if they say, I don't know, they're simply saying that they don't know what to expect from the rest of labor, and they're right. We never know if labor is actually going to be 10 more hours. It might be 10 more minutes. That's something we can't predict. However, if a person is ready to request pain medication, in our experience, they will clearly say, I want to request drugs and I am sure of it. So we've seen this over and over again that a person in labor is capable of making that decision for themselves. and that they will know. But when someone says, and we want to ask them what they think, and if they say, I don't know, that is actually not a request for drugs. But when they are ready, they'll say, yes, I'm sure. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie.
Sorry, guys, I had to mute myself for some outside noise and then couldn't unmute myself again. So we want to talk now about what happens if pain is outside the range of normal. So what are the occasions when labor pain outside of what we would consider the normal range and drugs are more likely to be needed? One is, we talked before about how movement can be pain relieving. So sometimes restriction of movement can have the opposite effect. So this can include lying on your back with or without continuous external fetal monitoring. If a person knows they'll be required to have external fetal monitoring continuously throughout their labor, for example, they are expecting twins or they are having a VBAC, attempting a vaginal birth after a cesarean, this is another good reason to consider having a doula, because a lot of creative pain relief techniques may be needed due to having less mobility. We'd like to note that there are no studies about whether external fetal monitoring is beneficial with twins, VBAC, epidural, Pitocin, etc. These are all times when it would be required, but there aren't necessarily studies backing it up. It's a matter of opinion and hospital protocol. And it's true that epidurals and Pitocin can lead to higher rates of unusual heartbeat patterns in the baby. So external fetal monitoring will be able to detect this quickly. We are going to now put up another slide. And the following are other reasons that a birthing person might be more likely to request medication or to change their mind about an unmedicated childbirth if that was their original plan. I think we've gone past. Hold on.
I apologize. I'm going to be working on getting the getting us back to the correct slide.
Well, if you caught that slide, you will notice it was a very short list. There were only 3 items on it, and there are not a lot of scenarios where labor pain becomes abnormal, so this can help to predict when it might happen. The first one is when we have use of Pitocin to either induce or augment labor. Pitocin is an artificial version of our body's own natural oxytocin. And because there are 2 reasons why Pitocin can affect the pain sensations of labor. One is that it can sometimes create much more quickly, more intense contractions. So you don't have as much time, as we talked earlier about adapting and your body adjusting to each of those new levels, and the endorphins kicking in to help manage. And Pitocin does not necessarily cause the brain to produce those endorphins in the same way that natural oxytocin does. So you have perhaps stronger contractions more quickly, and you have fewer endorphins to help you to manage. So that can create pain that is outside of the range of normal. Another, which I have very close personal experience with, is persistent back labor. That most commonly occurs when the baby is now positioned, often if they are occiput posterior, so the back of their head is facing the back of your body.
Ideally, we want babies to be OA, also put anterior, where the back of their head is toward the front of your body. When the back of the baby's head is pressing against your tailbone, or perhaps their head is transverse, they might be pressing against your hips, and that can cause a lot of consistent pain, even in between contractions, which can be very hard to manage. And the last thing on that list is sleep deprivation. We, as doulas, we work very hard to make sure that our clients know that they can get sleep at all points during labor and help them to accomplish that, because we do find that when people do not have enough sleep, it's not necessarily that the pain becomes stronger, but it does become much harder to manage. And that is often a time that we see people choose medication when that was not their original plan. Some people do choose to continue without drugs in all of these situations. It is possible, but it is more challenging, and it can be helpful to have a plan in advance for what you might want to do if you were becoming overwhelmed by the pain of labor. We recommend that you discuss this with your birth support people ahead of time. And here are some approaches that families have taken. They're feeling that sense of overwhelm. The first one is to try 3 non-medical comfort measures first. Try them, give them some time, and see if they are effective for you, or if they get you far enough along in the labor that now things are closer to welcoming baby than you were before. Wait 30 to 60 minutes and see if you feel that you are coping better. Sometimes the labor just takes a slightly different path, and suddenly you are able to cope better, or your endorphins catch up with you. Or if you are going through that transition period, oftentimes once we have reached 10 centimeters dilation, people suddenly find that they can cope much better. Some people find that having a cervical exam to check dilation can be helpful, because it can let them know if perhaps they're almost done with labor. You can ask if you are receiving Pitocin to have it decreased or turned off. And if you do choose pain medication, you may want reassurance that it is understandable and a good decision that you don't have to feel guilty about. That is something that certainly, if you have a doula, they will be reminding you of. If you have other support people in your life, you might want to have a conversation with them in advance to let them know what kind of what you might need to hear or might like to hear, if that's a choice you make that was not what you wanted to originally. We have a question in the comments that said that I've heard that cervical exams can be painful too. And oftentimes early in labor, cervical exams can be more painful because the cervix is oftentimes it's tilted back a bit towards the back of your body. Providers have to reach up quite high to get at it. Oftentimes, as labor progresses and the cervix moves forward, begins to soften more and dilate more, people often have less trouble with the sensations of cervical exams. Not always. Some people are particularly sensitive to them. We definitely recommend using whatever relaxation strategies, nice, deep, slow breathing, all of those kind of things can really help. The same kind of things that might help you manage through a contraction can help you to manage through a cervical exam as well, if it feels challenging for you. Some things to think about. Would you want encouragement to get through this part of labor, the challenging part that you're running up against, without drugs? Or would you prefer that people not talk you out of drugs? some people really want to make it clear that they are going to ask for what they need. And other people feel like they might benefit from encouragement if they're holding back. And oftentimes we find that when someone was not initially planning on receiving medical pain relief and then they choose to do it, sometimes their partners might try to talk them out of it. And once they've made that firm decision, that's usually not what they are looking for. So think about what you might want or need to hear, and help share that with your support team. And now we're going to talk about those 6 types of medical pain relief that we mentioned earlier. The first one on the list is the one that I think most of us have heard of most commonly, which is epidural. Epidural is pain medication, a mixture of pain medications that is continuously put into the epidural space around your spinal column through a thin catheter. People think of a needle with an epidural, and there is a needle that is used to insert the catheter, but then that needle comes out and it's just a soft plastic catheter delivering that medication. Once you receive an epidural, you should have pretty complete pain relief if it's working appropriately. And if it is a good epidural, you should also be able to maintain some movement and mobility in your legs. So people often are surprised at the number of positions that they can get into. You do have to stay in bed, but people are surprised by that. So again, if you look into that ahead of time, or you have a doula there to support you, you can still make use of movement after an epidural, but you are obviously a little more restricted. Narcotics is the next thing on the list. So epidurals do often contain different types of narcotics, but in this case, we're talking about IV narcotics, which are administered, and they can be a bit shorter acting than an epidural. They cannot be used if they believe that you are closer than 4 hours away from delivering your baby. They cannot be used in that window, because then you might end up having a baby who is born a bit more sleepy than we would like to see. They might need a little more assistance once they are born. One of the main ways we see narcotics used effectively in labor is for therapeutic rest, which is what we see at number 3. Sometimes, for different reasons, early labor can be more intense than normal. That might have to do with the baby's position. It might have to do with just your body's reaction to the beginning stages of labor. And it can be very hard to sleep and to rest. And knowing that you've got a lot of labor in front of you when you're in that state can be very challenging. And if you were hoping to avoid an epidural, you might feel like there's no way around it now. Therapeutic rest is a way to get a few hours of good concentrated sleep. It doesn't stop the labor, but it just allows you to sleep through it and to come out on the other side a bit better rested. Again, that cannot be used if they think you're closer than 4 hours from delivering your baby.
And I'm going to chime in, Carrie. Also, I'm not sure if it was clear, the difference between an epidural versus narcotics is that epidural is a form of anesthesia that creates numbness, and therefore the person will need to be committed to staying in bed, whereas narcotics and therapeutic rest are delivered into the bloodstream through an IV, and they wear off, and so a person could get out of bed again.
Thank you for clarifying that, Amanda. And yeah, as I mentioned, sometimes people who are hoping to avoid an epidural, prefer this idea of like a shorter acting narcotic because it does enable them to do things that they can't with an epidural, such as moving and eating and things of that nature. Number 4 is nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a tool that a lot of folks use who are hoping to avoid an epidural but need a little bit of extra support. And it is an inhaled drug. So you would get a mask that has both nitrous oxide and oxygen flowing through it. And you place it over your nose and mouth when a contraction comes on and breathe normally. And the nitrous oxide, we say the nitrous oxide does not eliminate the pain of contractions, but it makes you care a bit less about it. You tend to just feel a bit more relaxed, a bit more calm, and better able to manage the sensations of labor. We find that it's often really great used in combination with other types of relaxation techniques, such as mindfulness techniques and hypnobirthing techniques and things like that. It's just going to kind of double the relaxation power that helps you through those contractions. It can be stopped at any time. It's very short acting. So if you decide that it is not working for you, or you just want to take a break from it, you just stop breathing it and the effects go away within moments. And again, there are not the same kind of restrictions on movement or eating that you would get with an epidural. The last 2 items on the list are pain relief that are specific to back labor, which we talked about earlier, that occurs sometimes when babies are malpositioned. And the first one is sterile water injections, which I've personally had myself, and think that they are kind of magical when they work for you. That you have 2 pressure points, acupressure points on your back, just above the buttocks, and they, when pressed firmly, they provide some pain relief, often from the sensations of back labor. Sterile water injections are just what they sound like. Sterile water is injected under the skin over those 2 points in your back so that you get continuous pressure on those points until the water is absorbed, which generally takes a couple of hours. And it can be a really effective alternative to medication. It's a medical intervention, but not a medication intervention for people who are experiencing back labor. And again, there are not any sort of restrictions around that. People do report that it can sting a bit going in, but generally, if you're experiencing back labor, a little sting is probably not going to put you off from trying this technique. And lidocaine patches for back labor. A lidocaine patch is just an anesthetic patch that will be placed on your back to deliver pain relief directly to the lower back where you are experiencing the pain at the time.
Thank you, Carrie. And what I'd like to say now is that we had announced the time of this workshop and in different places, and in one place we announced a time frame that would be ending right about now, and in another place we said that the workshop would go on a little bit longer. So I'm going to find a compromise right in the middle, and I'm going to probably talk for about another 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will be finishing up. If you do need to head out now and you're watching us live, let us know if you have any final questions. What I'd like to talk about in conclusion is that I'd like to say a little bit more about epidural anesthesia. And this information is for everyone. It's for people who do not plan to use an epidural, and it's for people who do plan to use an epidural, because we want you to know and be informed and empowered with this information, whatever your plan is and whatever type of birth you ultimately have. So what I'd like to talk about is that any epidural can be increased or decreased in its dosage. And when we look at the options for a low dosage of medication in an epidural, there are advantages that can be found over a higher dose epidural. So there are medical studies which show that when people received a lower dose of medication, they reported satisfactory pain relief. And the benefit was that they were able to preserve much more of their mobility, so that they found their lower body was not immobilized by using a lower dose. So a lower dose corresponds to higher mobility. There are different ways to create a low dose epidural, and you can ask your medical care providers if you choose to have an epidural, or if you need an epidural that you were not planning to have. You can ask your medical care providers, the anesthesiologist. You'd want to ask that doctor in particular, how would you create a low dose epidural? Because there are different ways to do so. They might start out with a lower baseline dose. They might use a different combination of drugs, and so you can ask how they would achieve that, and let them know that that might be something that you're interested in. I'll also say that probably the number one side effect of epidurals is that they might not work properly. So when someone is relying on this as a comfort measure and a form of pain relief, there are occasions where the anesthesia is administered, but it doesn't work properly at first, and the person still feels sensation. Oftentimes it's on one side. The anesthesia takes effect correctly on half of the body, vertically or laterally, and it does not take effect on the other half. And that is a particularly uncomfortable experience. In a case like that, we don't necessarily want to make the anesthesia heavier and heavier and heavier. That is an option in that case, but there can be other ways to make an adjustment so that the coverage is working properly, the dosage remains low, and mobility is preserved. And the benefits of preserving mobility are that with an epidural is that it allows for a lot more options with position changes. And with those position changes, there is a school of thought, and we're starting to have more research and evidence showing that position changes allow babies to maneuver their way through the pelvis, the birthing person's pelvis, more easily. Labor can be shorter, and that position changes are an important tool to use for better outcomes in childbirth. So I'm trained as a childbirth instructor through the Lamaze International Organization, and the studies that the Lamaze organization points to have found that position changes do allow for shorter labors, and that it can be a cesarean prevention measure to change positions so that babies can maneuver the pelvis. So with a low dose epidural, we have seen people get into a squatting position. We have seen people get onto their hands and knees. We've seen them get into a kneeling position, a lunging position, and that might not be, that probably is not what we commonly think of when someone has an epidural. We tend to think of someone lying in bed very still, but the position changes are possible. Doulas tend to be very knowledgeable about these kind of position changes, and anyone can ask for help with just being more upright. Being sitting straight upright is going to give you benefits over laying down horizontally. Sitting upright strengthens contractions, and this could reduce the need for a labor stimulating drug such as Pitocin. So we want to make use of our positions, and in order to do that, we want to go for the lower dosage of epidural anesthesia. And we've also heard people say that while they're giving birth, if they're not required to maintain a totally horizontal position, they have the freedom to sit upright and possibly change positions. Some people report that they feel more in control psychologically, as opposed to when they are strictly lying down in a horizontal position, staring up at people looking down at them. So there can be a psychological benefit as well to position changes, which can be achieved with a lower dose of an epidural. So we want people to have that information so that you can have a conversation with medical care providers about how to make best use of an epidural if it's needed, so that, and also retain the mobility and the movement that is so beneficial to birth. So I'm going to finish up here and end our official presentation.